There are two things in particular that stand out that I'll share with you. One of them is that 50 years ago, most college counselors could tell their students, apply wherever you want to apply, don't worry about the costs, because financial aid will make up the difference. And back then, by and large, that was true. In other words, if you were a family that had a greater amount of demonstrated financial need, colleges gave you more in financial aid, so that the cost of attendance was essentially based on what you could afford to pay. It meant that there wasn't the kind of stress that a lot of families are experiencing nowadays with regard to paying for college and certainly worry about loans after graduation. The other big difference, and it's a major one, is that back then, 50 years ago, a relatively small percentage of people had college degrees, which meant that just having a college degree was pretty much an assurance of a job, which meant in turn that when you went to college, frankly, you studied whatever you wanted to study, whatever interested you, because frankly, the particular major for most things was immaterial. Sure, there were certain fields that you absolutely needed to pick a major for. If you wanted to be an accountant, you'd better major in accounting, and if you wanted to be a doctor, you'd better go to med school. But for the vast majority of students, it was really an opportunity to spend 4 years learning more about yourself and studying the things that fascinated you. Well, obviously, times change. But what I'm hoping I can do this evening is send you home with something a little more hopeful, because to a certain extent, two things are still true. You have to work at it a bit more, but you can find a college that's affordable. And certainly you were given just now, from Amanda, the option of Nova, and that's certainly one route that people take, and makes it affordable. And I'm also going to argue that you still have an opportunity to look at the next 4 years of college as a chance to shape yourselves. I want to bring you back, in other words, to the kind of feeling I had when I spent the summer before my freshman year of college, like a little kid in a candy store, looking at the college catalog and looking at all these wonderful courses and thinking, I can't wait to get into this stuff. I wonder what this course involves, that course involves. That's the world that at least I hope for some of you, I can help you visualize and see for yourselves. I have two topics in particular for tonight. How do you prepare yourself for college? And how do colleges decide if they want you? And I was delighted, by the way, with regard to the second one, to hear the passage from Frank Bruni that Mr. Peters read to you, because I'm going to walk you through an actual admissions committee experience. I'm going to let you see exactly what happens when all these pieces of paper, actually they're electrons because you're doing this stuff online, but all the electrons reach the admissions committee of whatever college you're applying to. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you an insider's view on that, and I think you'll find that helpful. At least I hope you will. So let's begin with how do you prepare yourself for college. And I'm going to propose this, that probably one of the best preparations you can give yourself for college is ask yourself this question: who am I? And there are two important reasons for asking that question. One of them is the answer will help you write a terrific college essay. I'll show you that in a moment. And the other is that the answer will help you get the most out of the college you do go to. So it's worth spending a little time on. For example, let's imagine a prospective college student, and let's imagine that this is her essay. I'm going to put it up on the screen, but since it's going to be a little bit of, how should we say, type intensive, I'm going to read it to you as well. This is this young woman's essay for college. The freezing waters of the North Atlantic swirl around my ankles off the rocky New England coast. I have seen these tide pools countless times, but until today, I've never thought about them. I am on a field trip with my marine biology class, and although the wind is blowing hair into my eyes and I am shivering, I am more fascinated than cold. 100 yards away are the normal things of life: trees, rocks, sand, and a school bus. But just inches from my feet are trillions of plants and creatures, a whole world of them, in fact, that I had never before noticed. Seaweed, algae, eelgrass, fungi, tiny invertebrates of odd shapes and colors. Until now, high school was a place where I excelled at things. I know the atomic number of sodium. I can identify iambic pentameter verse. I can solve quadratic equations. I have memorized the Gettysburg Address. I can't say that any of these things has been especially meaningful to me, however. But suddenly, on this bitterly cold day, I am spellbound. We share this planet with these amazing creatures, and yet their planet is so utterly different from our own. At that moment, they filled me with such wonder that I needed to know more about them. That's when I knew that I wanted to be a marine biologist. I found my passion. Okay, so who am I? And notice she does a pretty good job of getting across what was really a pivotal moment in her life. So let me present to you, what are some of the things that would help you answer the question, who am I? Well, start in this way, and this is something I would very much propose to all of you. Do a survey of your life. Start with thinking about, what are you proudest of? What are the turning points? What events have shaped you? In fact, I'll tell you something. It's often best if you do this survey of your life chronologically. Start from the earliest memory you have of something you did that you felt very proud of, or that in some way keeps resonating with you. I'll give you an example from my own life. The earliest thing I can remember in my life that made me feel proud was the first day of kindergarten. Now, as you can probably infer from everything I've been telling you so far about me, that was a long time ago. Okay? And here's what I remember. My mother walked me to school, and we walked into a room, and the room was filled with two things that were particularly notable. One of them was it was filled with children, and the other was that they were all crying their heads off. There was mass wailing and weeping in this room. Okay? She sat me down with a puzzle. The puzzle had bears on it. I even remember that. And the other thing that I remember is wondering, why are all these people crying? I mean, this seemed like a very nice place, had a lot of toys. I was enjoying the puzzle. And I started feeling a little bit proud of myself. I mean, all these kids were crying, and there I was, working away at this puzzle. My mom said goodbye to me. I said goodbye to her, and she said, see you in school, and that was that. And now, I'm not going to go through and try to analyze in every detail why this resonates after all these years, and boy, it's a lot of years. But in some ways, if I were doing what I'm urging you to do, students, that is, make a list of things year by year in my life that I can remember, that I'm proud of, that resonated with me, that would start the list off. And in some ways, I sort of think the fact that I remember it after all these years probably does say something about me, something about how my character developed over time. So start with that. Do an assessment. By the way, you'll discover you're going to feel pretty good about yourself when you get done this. Honest. If you take this seriously, and year by year try to find things that keep resonating with you. Ask yourself why they stand out. Often, focusing on a concrete incident in your life is what will work best, particularly when you're trying to translate some of this into a college essay. It's exactly what that young woman did in the essay I read to you. She focused on a precise moment when she realized she wanted to be a marine biologist. That doesn't have to be that kind of thing for you, but whatever works is important. Many of the most, and this is the other thing I would emphasize with you, is you'll read college essays. A member of an admissions committee. Many of the things, I'm going to switch. Okay. It's on, okay. Many of the most effective essays you're likely to read focus on very common teenage experiences. You don't have to feel that unless you've done something spectacular, you know, won a gold medal at the Olympics, that you have nothing to write about. They're often very mundane things. In fact, I found from my own experience that for example, some of the best jock essays I've ever read in 30 years of doing college admissions has come from people who, by their own admission, are not terribly good athletes. You know, they're applying to Delaware, they're applying to a D1 school. They do not intend to be a varsity athlete, but they will, of course, make a good contribution to intramurals or club sports. The thing that stands out about those essays is that they write about themselves and what they do with their sport with such conviction and such detail that when you get done reading the essay, you understand why they get up at 5 in the morning to swim laps in a pool or run around a track. That sort of thing is compelling to a college admissions committee, but it's also important for all of you, whatever it is you do, students, that's important to you. Think about why you do them, what you get out of this. That self-understanding can be so important throughout this process. This too may help answer the question, who am I? And these, by the way, these 3 questions I'm going to give you are ones I often ask students when I'm interviewing them. Imagine you're in a time machine. Imagine it takes you back 4 years. So instead of being at the start of your senior year, you're looking at yourself as you were 4 years ago, beginning the 8th grade. Ask yourself, you're looking at this woman or this guy who's me 4 years ago. What's different? How am I different from that person? Think for a bit about what's changed, because the question, who am I, is itself a moving target. It changes through the course of our lives. So start understanding what's already happened to you, how you're already different from this person 4 years ago. You can guess at what the next question is. Get back in the time machine. Propel yourselves 4 years into the future. Now stand face to face with who you will be at the start of your senior year of college. This, of course, is going to take a great act of imagination on your part, but imagine what is going to be different, or at least what do you expect to be different? How are you going to change over the next 4 years? What's college going to do for you? You may not have all the answers. You can't have all the answers, certainly. But think about what it might mean. Think about what kind of person you might become, or might allow yourself to become. And this question I like asking people. Students, you're 17, 18 years old. You've lived long enough now to get a sense of the world that you're becoming an adult into. Ask yourself this question. What makes you angry? Now, I'm not going to, obviously not going to poll people right here, but I hope when you go home, you'll take some time to reflect on those questions, because I think they will help shape your understanding of yourself in a way that will help you when you're writing a college essay or going on a college interview, and they will also help you when you set foot in your first college classes as a freshman and beyond. While you're at it, consider this question too. Why go to college? Now here's what people usually talk about when that question's asked. That's the typical list of things that people cite when they say, why go to college? Here's what people rarely talk about. Number one, learning's actually entertaining. It's richly entertaining. I had lectures when I was in college where, even though we were in large lecture rooms, larger than this, the instructors, the professors lecturing, were so riveted that you look forward to these classes, you enjoyed them, they captured your attention. 50 years later, I still remember them. I still remember those lectures. Understand this too, everything you enjoy, everything that gives you pleasure in life, requires your having some kind of advanced knowledge of what that involves. You know, if you play a sport and you enjoy it, you weren't born loving that sport. Somebody had to teach it to you. And after they taught it to you, then you learned to love it and enjoy it. That's true with almost everything. I cited the recent solar eclipse because I think for a lot of us, that was fascinating, but it depended on your understanding, the basic science of why a solar eclipse occurs. And so that's a piece of what college does. Self-confidence, you know, so much of life, and I suspect the parents sitting next to you, students, can confirm this, so much of life's successes, really simply depend on believing in yourself, having the confidence in yourself. One of the beautiful things college does is, yeah, it's challenging, but because it's challenging, when you get through it, you realize, you know, I can handle almost anything. College does that for you. And finally, it gives you the wherewithal to get facts. It teaches you how to have a healthy, what I call a healthy skepticism. You're not the slave of what somebody tells you. You know how to ask questions. And particularly in an internet age, be able to sift and sort what's likely to be true and what's unlikely to be true. So those are all things that play into this as well. Colleges can't guarantee happiness, but I think they can do a lot to give you the tools to be a happier person. All right, now that you know who you are, then you start applying. So, how does a college decide who gets in? The majority of colleges, this is the good news, the majority of colleges are not that difficult to get into. I mean, I'll spare you all of the, this is the gist of what's on that chart. Nearly half the colleges in the United States admit 70% or more of their applicants. In fact, there's a good chunk of them, as you can see from the bottom, more than 85%, that admit more than 85% of the people who apply to them. So these are four-year colleges in the United States, and that's the degree of, selectivity. That's the norm. The norm is more students who apply to get in than don't, and in fact, in some cases, significantly more who apply. The bottom line for all of you is there is a college for you, exactly as Frank Bruni said in the passage that Mr. Peters read to you this evening. May not be exactly the one you were hoping most to get into, but you will absolutely, positively get into college. And I'll tell you something else. The vast majority of students who get into and wind up enrolling in a college that's not their first choice, either because they didn't get into their first choice or couldn't afford their first choice, turns out they're happy as clams. They discover within weeks, sometimes even within hours of enrollment, that they're perfectly happy. And that's the typical college experience for students. How do colleges make admission decisions? Well, some schools, particularly the ones that are not particularly selective, so what they're trying to determine is simply, can you do the work? Can you succeed academically? For them, it's largely a case, frankly, of looking almost mechanically at a grade point average, course selections, and your test scores. There'll be others, however, which will be a little more nuanced about it. They're going to look at things like how much of your curriculum has been academic. How many advanced courses have you taken as a part of your curriculum? And by the way, I will tell you, as you know, that yours is an IB school. IB is the gold standard for college admissions committees. That is what carries, hands down, the most clout with people. Yeah, I just see some plenty going on in that. So congratulations on that. And also, when they're nuanced, they're also going to look at trend from 9th to 12th grade. That's important. Most admissions committees that are taking the time to review an application with some care are going to accept the fact that your average 9th grader is 14 years of age. I think I speak for the parents in this room as well as myself in saying that if I had to pick a year of my life, which was the absolute nadir, the lowest moment, the most unhappy, miserable, dismal time. I think 14 would probably be exactly the right age to do it. So we're understanding. You know, if you were having trouble adjusting to high school and all the other things that are going on, we can appreciate that. As we get closer to senior year and into the fall semester senior year, of course, the grades start weighing more and more heavily. And finally, the most selective schools, the schools that really are the most competitive to get into, are going to consider all these things and are going to pour over your activities, boards, honors, essays, letters of rec, to see what they can infer about you from looking at your talents and your life experiences and so on. And the reason for that is simple. They get far more qualified applicants, academically qualified applicants, than they have space for. So really what they're looking for is tiebreakers, and tiebreakers are things that, you know, things you say about yourself in your essay, how you come across in that, and of course, other kinds of achievements that you've had that bring something special to them. I think perhaps the best way to visualize this is to think, if you're on an admissions committee, first of all, if you're a member of if you're thinking about your faculty, would our faculty enjoy teaching you? So is what's coming across? And that's a different question, by the way, from are you a good student? I don't know how many parents in this room are or have been teachers as well. There's a good sprinkling of hands going up. Well, anybody who's ever taught can tell you there are students who you give A's to because they earned an A. You have to give them what they earned. But how can I put this delicately? They're not nice people. I mean, it's a kid who earns an A but is very full of herself, or a kid who's isn't very respectful of other students' views, or he's a grade grubber. Whatever it is, the kid is just in some ways unpleasant. But you know, you give the A to. So here we are. We know letters of rec can often help us understand qualities in the kid that might not be apparent just from looking at the A. And obviously, if you're an A student who is a wonderful human being as well, great. The letter of rec will help a college understand that. So with that in mind, I'm going to look at a college applicant with you, and I'm going to invite you to suppose that you're on a college admissions committee. So I want you to see it through the eyes of a college admissions committee. All right? So we're going to imagine a student. We're going to give the student a name. Okay? Here is George's weighted high school GPA through the junior year. Here are his test scores. Here's what he wants to study. All right? B+ kid. Okay, SAT certainly. He's a solid student. He's not a superstar. George isn't going to Harvard or MIT, but he's a solid kid. I'll tell you something else about George. Well, first of all, let's look at his transcript, and then I'll tell you something else about George. What's in red? 9th grade, 10th grade. You can see it highlighted here, 11th and 12th. I won't belabor it, but what you can see in general is that, yeah, the grades from 9, he's not a bad grade. He's got B's and a C+ starting there in 9th grade. But as you work your way to 10th and 11th, you start seeing grades starting to go up. You also see a little bit of honors work. He goes to an AP school. He's finally taking AP courses senior year. So there's a progression. It's something a little more rigorous each year. Again, it's not by any means the toughest curriculum you'll ever see, but it certainly is getting progressively stronger, and grades are on the upswing. That's the transcript. So, he's a respectable candidate. This is what I wanted to tell you. Believe it or not, this kid is a reasonable candidate for 90% of the colleges in the United States, quite honestly. He can certainly, and he will certainly be admissible probably to at least 75% of them, and the remaining 15% to get us up to 90% would be schools where he's competitive, but you know, those are going to be places where they'll have lots of candidates, very similar stats to Georgia's, and so they're going to decide which ones are you going to take. And, you know, the question is, and I alluded to that word earlier, tiebreakers. Assuming he doesn't have the usual hooks, and I'll be honest with you, there are, being an offspring of alum at certain colleges will make a huge difference in your chances. Being a recruited athlete clearly will make a huge difference in some colleges. Having a famous or wealthy parent can also help you in some colleges. That's the honesty here I'm going to give you. So, for example, with these out-of-class activities helping, this is George's activities. Well, I'm not seeing wild enthusiasm on your faces. Yeah, they're not impressive. All right. So let's go to the essay. Now, George was writing on a common application essay, and one of the prompts the year he applied was this: discuss an accomplishment or event, formal or informal, that marks your transition from childhood to adulthood within your culture, community, or family. So let's see what George had to say, and I'm going to read it to you. As soon as I come ahead. Okay. Here's his essay. I'm the baby of our family, and one of my earliest childhood memories was moving into our big new house on Long Island with my parents and my older brother and sister. Each of us had our own bedroom suite. I was still young enough to be spellbound by the digital displays on the washer, dryer, double oven, and microwaves, and by the colored lights that shined on the waterfall and reflecting pond in the backyard. Our property was over an acre, and landscapers always seemed to be at work doing something outside. But the Great Recession hit us hard. First, my dad lost his job, then my mom lost hers. I was still too young, however, to realize what all this would mean for us. For a while, there was no reason to. My life was more or less unchanged. I still went to school, I still fought with my brother, who was 2 years older than I am, and I was still in awe of my sister, 5 years older, a two-sport athlete, lead in the spring musical at her school, and a straight-A honors student. Mom took me and my brother to boys' soccer camp and piano lessons. My friends still came over to my house, and I still spent time at theirs. 3 years ago, not long after I had started my freshman year of high school, our lives changed. My parents told me that we were moving. Within a week, we had moved to a two-bedroom apartment. I shared one of the bedrooms with my brother. My sister Gail slept in the living room when she was home from college. It was Gail who told me and my brother Nelson that our parents had declared bankruptcy. I felt frightened. And guilty, too, because my first thoughts were pretty selfish ones. What would I have to give up? Would I still be able to go to college? Gail had a big academic scholarship. But what if I couldn't get a scholarship like hers? What would my friends think when they saw the apartment? My parents kept reassuring us that everything would be okay, and for a while, we believed them. One day, as my father was driving me home from a late soccer practice at school, our car's electrical system went haywire. It had happened before, but this time we stalled in the middle of rush hour traffic. To make matters worse, the car behind us slammed into ours. My memory of it is mostly of sounds and sensations. Brakes screeching, a loud thud in back, a tremor running through our car, our heads hitting the headrests, radiator fumes coming from the car behind us, the other driver cursing as he got out of his car, police sirens, people shouting obscenities as they eased their cars past us. Throughout the ordeal of the past few years, my parents had been upbeat, especially in front of me, their youngest. But this time, something snapped. As we waited by the side of the road for a tow truck we couldn't afford, my father grew strangely silent. I waited for him to say something. Nothing. He scared me. I'd never seen him look so downcast and defeated. I teetered on the edge of a momentous action. Until that moment in my life, my parents had always hugged me, but I had never hugged them first. I put both my arms around him and hugged him tight. "I love you, Dad," is what came out of my mouth. As I saw his face brighten and the light come back into his eyes, I sensed in the words of this common application essay prompt that I was making my transition from childhood to adulthood. Let me ask you, before I move on to the next slide, just show a hand. How many of you like this kid? Okay, so that's it. Okay, good. So, and how many would say, does it change your view of George that had been developing until now? Okay, yeah. It also helps to see what the high school says about it. Let's look at some school recommendations. Here are few excerpts from George's letter. He start with his English teacher, and very interesting letter. I first met George 3 years ago in my 9th grade English class. Many 9th graders are bewildered by literature, and George was no exception. But he plodded through the course and managed to scrape by with a B-. His research paper was a choppy and forgettable analysis of which countries were likely to make it to the 2014 World Cup soccer finals in Brazil, which he patched together and documented from interviews and press reports that he found on the web. That's why I wasn't terribly excited to see George enroll in my 11th grade English class last year. But what a difference 2 years can make. This was an honors class, no less. And while I can't say that he was the top student in the class, he certainly held his own. His term paper, tracing Huckleberry Finn's growing moral awareness, showed a more sophisticated tolerance for ambiguity and moral uncertainty than I usually see in teenagers. Nor was I prepared to see how good a writer George had become. To my surprise, I found myself looking forward to reading his essays. It was chastening to realize how badly I underestimated him. And here's his school counselor recommendation. While most of his classmates spend their summers touring Europe, climbing mountains, or enrolling in special summer programs, George is one of the few seniors at our school who works full-time during the summers and 12 hours per week during the fall and spring. He is a caddy in an upscale golf course, and many of the golfers are the parents of his classmates. Although he says little about it, I know that his family has experienced a financial downturn and that most of what he earns will be going towards his college education. Despite his heavy work schedule and the demands of his schoolwork, George is one of the most cheerful kids I know. He's excited by the prospect of college. He was especially turned on by his AP Psych class this year and thinks that he may decide to pursue a career in developmental psychology. So that's the school, talking about George. All right, now we get to the admissions committee. Feel the tension in the room. Like most things, it's pluses and minuses, and that's what goes on in an admissions committee debate. There are very few perfect candidates, mainly because there are no perfect human beings on this planet. So obviously there are pluses and minuses always. Let's imagine a conversation taking place around some kind of table with the members of the admissions committee. The pluses: the essay shows lots of maturity, self-awareness. Yeah, it sure does. On the other side, someone's piping up. Other applicants have taken more rigorous curricula. He dropped foreign language after the sophomore year, just a few honors and AP classes. Sure, but the kid works every weekend during much of the school year. George's test scores are slightly below our median. But his English teacher's rec speaks to his intellectual growth over the past 2 years. He wants to study psychology. Our department is quantitatively focused, and his math SAT and math grades are lower. Agreed, he is weaker in math. But his essay and letters suggest that he has grit and resilience and enthusiasm. Those things count for a lot too. He will probably need lots of financial aid. Can we afford it? And of course, the trade-off is that most of our students have never known what it's like to earn money and forego luxuries. Frankly, we need more Georges in our student body. By the way, the reference to financial aid and financial need, at some schools, that will indeed be an issue and a factor. 50 years ago, the vast majority of colleges in our country were need-blind in making admission decisions. Nowadays, there's a good subset of schools that are need-aware. That is, they're taking students, at least on the bubble, students that they can go either way with, are taking into consideration whether or not they can afford to pay the full tuition or not. That is a piece of this. Finally, well, let's take a vote. So that's George. And by the way, I'm not going to pretend to give you an outcome of a vote. Depending on the college, it could go either way. And I think that's really what dovetails with, it's purely serendipitous. I did not collude with Mr. Peters in advance of this, but that's exactly what he's getting at. If you get turned down by a college you love, frankly, it probably has very little to do with you and a great deal to do with what the priorities are of that particular school, in the particular applicant pool that you're appearing in for the particular year you're applying. These things change year after year. And the example that my colleagues in admissions always like to give is, you play a trombone in a year when the music department needs a bassoonist, you're going to be out of luck. On the other hand, if you waited a year later when trombones were in demand, you'd be luckier. It's stuff sometimes very much beyond